science enthusiasts. I'm your host, Jason Zackowski. I'm a high school chemistry teacher, but you probably know our dogs, Bunsen and Beaker. They're the science dogs on social media. This show takes what's best from their account, the curiosity and fun found there, and swirls it into podcast form. Every week, we're going to take some deep dive into an area of science and look at the research that's going on with our pets. We'll also have an expert guest who will enthrall you with their area of knowledge. This is the Science Pawdcast. Ho, ho, ho! Happy holidays, everybody. This is the last podcast of 2021, and then we're taking a break for about a month. We'll be back at the start of February. It was an incredibly busy but rewarding week this week. Kris and I helped deliver letters from Santa brought by Bunsen to little kids. That was super, super cute. It was picked up actually by Goodable, which is a website that only promotes good stories. So that made me feel really good. We have an amazing show coming up on Twitter Spaces as for our last space of the year, where we're having service animals and emotional support animal handlers come talk about what they do with their animals. And I'm on 2 different internet shows on Twitter. So it's a busy week, but it's really rewarding. On the podcast this week in Science News, we're going to take a look at the Parker Probe. Some amazing footage came out from the sun. In Pet Science, we're going to take a look at how dogs may be smarter than humans in some certain ways. Our guest in Ask an Expert is this amazing lady that I know. She's actually the smartest person that I know, and she's super gorgeous. It's Kris Zackowski. By popular demand, Kris is a guest for the last episode of the year. Hey dogs, why is the sun the most popular person at parties? Well, it's the sunniest person there. That's hilarious. Don't be mad about that joke. You're just throwing shade. Okay, we better get on with the podcast. There's a lot of sun puns. Because there's no time like science time. This week in Science News, we're talking about star damage. That's right. You might have saw the amazing images of the Parker Probe as it has approached we'll get to it, this really cool part between space and the sun. On social media, we posted it on Bunsen and Beaker's page. It's like sparks flying everywhere. And it's really recent. December 14th is when the Parker Probe has quote unquote arrived to actually touching the sun, like actually touching what is considered part of the sun. In between space, us, and our nearest star, interplanetary space, there is this intersection point that has been theorized called the Alphen critical surface. It's where the sun and all of its stuff becomes solar wind. There's this surface that is theorized, and it's about 13 million kilometers. It starts, that's where the probe is actually entered, 13 million kilometers above the sun's surface. It's proven that this Alphen critical surface exists, this intersection between the sun and interstellar space. So again, this is the place where plasma separates from the sun, the actual sun, and becomes the solar wind that is full of charged particles that stream towards the Earth. Now, these particles in solar wind is what is a big problem for our Earth if they get a little out of hand. It's like a doomsday scenario where they could take out all of our satellites if there's enough of it. And that's one of the missions of the Parker Probe, is to study this intersection point and learn more about solar wind. The other really cool reason why the Alphen Probe is headed towards this close to the sun is to study a mystery as to why the corona of the sun is so much hotter than the surface. That kind of wispy atmosphere of the sun, the corona, is incredibly hot. It's like 1,000,000 degrees Celsius, but the surface of the sun is only a few thousand. So the Alphen critical surface was named after this physicist named Hans Alphen, who proposed a reason why that might be, that magnetic waves would carry energy to the corona. And in 2009, they detected those waves in the lower corona. So there's 2 types of corona. There's the lower and upper. But it didn't look like there was enough energy. So having this probe, the Parker Probe, probe the sun for more information may answer that question. Now, the Parker probe is going to continuously go around the sun more and more and more for 2 more years. It's going to get even closer. It's going to dip in and out of this critical surface, gathering more data. One interesting thing they already found was as it approached the surface, they didn't know if the surface was going to be bumpy or smooth or jagged or rough. Turns out it was pretty smooth, but there was a noticeable difference in the instruments. The instruments on the Parker probe noticed a big change in magnetic field intensity, but also a drop in density. And the drop in density is really cool because it's it's so close to the sun's gravity is pulling back particles towards the sun. So instead of those particles escaping, they're kind of looping back. That's so cool. The sun is just so neat. So what else could we find? Who knows? It's the closest thing we ever shot towards the sun, and it's soaking up all the star damage to help us learn more science. That's science news for this week. This week in Pet Science, this is a really cool, quick little note about how dogs learn and dogs watch compared to humans. And this comes to us from Lori Santos, who is a cognitive psychologist at Yale University. The story goes that if you give a human a box to open, and before you give the human a box, you jiggle a handle, and you hand that box to the new human, say, hey, can you open the box? Chances are the human's going to try and jiggle the handle before they open the box, even if they just saw that you trying to jiggle the handle had no effect about getting into the box. If you do the same thing to a dog and jiggle the handle, the dog is a little bit more rational than humans and will think, that did nothing. I'm not going to try and jiggle the handle with my nose or my paw. I'm going to find another novel way to try and get into the box. So in some ways, dogs learn and solve problems quite a bit differently than humans. Humans fall prey to something called over-imitation. We are descendants from the apes. Monkey see, monkey do. We imitate way too much. We're prone to trusting other humans and what they're doing to then copy and solve a problem the same way. You might have seen this, and I've seen this before. Think of a scenario like a door only opens one way. It's a pull door. Somebody goes and shoves on it, and it doesn't open. Watch the next person. If they saw that person shove on it and then open it, they might also shove on it and then open it because they're trying to copy how the solution occurred. Not saying, oh, the shoving didn't actually open the door. It was the pulling. You know what? I've done that myself. I've been the person that has followed somebody and they've shoved on a door and I've copied them. And Kris has said, why did you do that? Didn't you see you had to pull open the door? And I was like, oh no, I'm an orangutan. Like, it was tough to do. So it's really cool to think that dogs think differently than humans. And that's just one small way that separates the pet from the owner. If you think about that, that can be applied to dog training. The imitation of how dogs imitate humans is not really the same. So dogs don't learn that way. And that can be definitely something to think about when you're training your dog. They may not want to imitate you or even imitate you at all. They will take the path of least resistance. And that's Pet Science for this week. Hey everybody, thanks for listening to our show week after week. If you want to know how to support the Science Pawdcast, here are a couple ways. It's always going to be free to download, so you'll never have to worry about paying for it. But, things do cost money running a podcast, and here are a couple ways you could help us out. One is join our Patreon page. It's amazing. It's growing. It's almost like an extended family. There's multiple tiers of support, and we have lots of fun perks for being part of our Patreon page. The other way you could support us is giving us an awesome review on Apple Podcasts or Google Podcasts, anywhere you can rate our podcast. Give us a great review. The third way you could support the show is checking out the BunsenBurnerBMD.com website. We have awesome merch there. We worked really hard finding quality merchandise that's comfortable with vibrant colors. And you'll find in limited quantities over the next couple months, maybe even less, the 2022 Bunsen and Beaker calendar. So 3 ways to support us: the Patreon page, 2, give us a great review, 3, head over to our merch stop and see if there's anything there you'd like. Thanks everybody. Now on to the interview section. It's time for Ask an Expert on the Science Pawdcast, and I have probably the best looking guest we've ever had on the podcast, and that is Kris Zackowski. How are you doing today, Kris?
I'm doing very well. Thank you for having me on the podcast.
How's your morning going?
Well, today is a quiet morning where I got to just wake up and spend the morning with the dogs, and Bunsen was cuddly, which was fantastic, which I look forward to every day. A funny thing actually happened this morning. I closed Bunsen in the bedroom and he barked and wanted to get out. But that was weird.
Why did you do that to him? Why did you do that to him?
I didn't know he was in there because normally he's out and about and not hiding in the bedroom. What a weirdo.
I think he was probably sleeping on the bed.
And because the light was off, it's dark. And I pulled a U and said, I can't see a dark thing in the dark.
I can't see dark things in dark places. I normally ask guests where they're calling from in the world. Where are we in the world, Kris? Like, to explain to people where the podcast comes from.
Well, the podcast comes from Red Deer, Alberta, which is about central Alberta, halfway between Edmonton and Calgary. Edmonton is the capital of Alberta, and Calgary is a very large city in the beautiful province of Alberta. And we live approximately smack dab right in the middle on the family farm just outside of Red Deer.
How many people live in Red Deer?
The last census was about 100,000.
Yeah, about 100,000. So it's not a huge city, but it's got everything that we need.
We get the benefit of living just outside of the city, so we get the farm life, but then are able to go into town to get all the amenities. So I can't complain.
Speaking of the farm, on social media, people always see the videos and the pictures of the dogs, and they're like, whoa, where do you live? There's so much stuff. And I'm like, I don't know. I'm the peasant that married into the royalty. How much land does your family have?
It's 3/4 of a section.
How many acres is that?
480 acres.
Right. Okay.
And my great-grandfather got the short end of the straw. They drew straws about who was going to continue the farm, and it was him. And here we are.
Now, I've explored with, before Bunsen and Beaker with Callan and Bunsen and Beaker, I've explored literally all of the creek bed that runs. It's our house is really, where we built our house is really pretty, hey? Like, it overlooks this bluff, and then there's this creek that runs, kind of snakes a little bit east and then all the way north. When you were little and living on the farm, did it look different, or did it look kind of like what it looks now?
There has been some erosion of the land, but it pretty much looks the same as it did. I would like to say. Now, back when my grandfather was on the farm, the creek was much larger and he learned to swim in it. So there definitely has been some changes over time with how the creek runs. So more recently, when there's spring runoff, you can really hear it going, and then it slows down to a trickle.
Mm-hmm. And then in the August, it's done. Like, it's just done. And yeah. I want to say that's new. When I first met you, and maybe when we moved out here as a very young couple, I swear there were fish in the creek. Like, the creek was a creek year round. I swear there were fish in it. I remember seeing fish. It's not a figment, but now there's no fish, guaranteed, like, because the creek dries up in August.
It has been drier, for sure. But we caught frogs with Ellie this year. That was cool.
I know, there's so many frogs, so that's kind of cool. You can hear them at night too in the summer, which is really nice. Let's get on to talking about you in the Ask an Expert section. So the first question I'm going to ask you is, could you talk about your education? You're a teacher.
I sure am. So I finished my Master of Educational Leadership from the University of Alberta in 2020. So that was a highlight and a good thing that came out of 2020 for us. And I do have a Bachelor of Education and I'm a generalist in elementary education with a minor in middle years. And so the fortunate part of that program is it is a cohort that is a degree. It's a collaborative degree from the Red Deer College and the University of Alberta. And it allowed me to stay in Red Deer to finish up my program. And another thing that I have added to my education is a certificate from the École de langue française et de culture québécois. It was a French immersion program that I attended at the Université du Québec à Chicoutimi in the summer of 2015.
Right. You went there with Megan.
With my best friend, Megan. But that was basically an experience that was a catalyst for me, a catalyst for change, that I said, hey, just a second, I did this and I can actually do my master's. And it was a really motivating factor, because sometimes you get stuck in the status quo of being a mom, being a teacher, being a wife, and you kind of get stuck there. But I became not unglued, but unstuck and moved forward with an exciting opportunity. And it continues to be a catalyst for change for me as I continue to tackle on other educational projects.
I'll tell you, when you came back from Quebec, you sure enjoyed wine a little bit more.
Okay, so not that I'm a heavy drinker or ever have been, but every day they drank wine at supper. So it was a normalized activity. And cheese. And cheese. There was cheese every day and fresh veggies. It was an astounding experience. But I came home and the wine is not the same here at home as it was in Quebec. I don't know if I just don't know how to pick them or what, but perhaps it was just best left in Quebec, that experience.
And you came back with some new French words that you used all the time. Like you got bit by a bug and you kept using this word for bug, a bibite or something like that.
I got
bit by a bibite.
I was very scared. It was a tick. And so imagine my delight of having to communicate with my stay-at-home family. I think, what is the word for tick? And I had to look it up, and it's the same word, tick. And I'm trying to explain, are there ticks here? And I don't think it was a tick, but it just was. It was a definite thing.
I just remember Zoom calling with you and you're like, I got bit by a bug. Maybe I'll die. And I'm like, well, I don't think you're going to die from a bug bite. But it was actually a pretty bad bug bite.
I really thought it was a tick. And of course, without knowing a lot about Lyme disease and only hearing about, the increase of ticks and, make sure you check your dogs. Like we're on the forefront of that with our dogs, and we always check when we go through the creek. But I was in a different place, Jason. I didn't know. Yeah. Like, are there ticks on the St. Lawrence River? I don't know.
They're probably like wine drinking, cigarette smoking ticks. So they're like really hard ticks.
Okay, perhaps.
Maybe. All right. So why did you get into education? Why did you want to become a teacher?
I've always wanted to become a teacher. There is a story of me in grade 7 where I would take my briefcase to school and want to be the teacher.
How did your teachers think about that?
They liked it.
Oh, really?
Yeah. Mrs. Monroe was sure that I would become a teacher, and she was a powerful influence on me. And Mrs. Dubois as well. Very excited for me to go into teaching.
So, you got your teaching degree, and like you've been teaching for a while, and yes. We're here to brag about our guests, and I brag about you all the time. You won a prestigious teaching award. Could you tell, like, what are some of the things that you do or have done to inspire kids in the classroom? Like what do you do to get kids excited about learning? Because it can be tough some days. They're sleepy, and you teach middle school kids. They're like, full of hormones and rage some days.
I don't know if there's specific things that I do, but what I like to think is that I build relationships with the kids, because when teaching middle school, you need to have your finger on the pulse of what's happening with your kids every day. And one thing that I do is I would wait in the hallway and welcome everybody into the classroom. And then you kind of get an idea of what the vibe is happening in the hallway, because a lot of things happen there that influence a student's ability to learn. Whether someone looked at them the wrong way, or there was some chatting at a locker and the kids are feeling insecure, you get an idea of how things are going to go. Especially after lunch, because things can happen on the playground. So that was one thing that I did when I was back in the classroom, is I made sure to be at the door and greeting the students and welcoming them into my environment. Another thing that I have done is I encourage student engagement by creating meaningful learning opportunities. And I use current educational strategies or pedagogy. So I use student choice, novelty and variety, authenticity, and intellectual safety for my students.
Wow. Okay. Every time I talk to you about that, I'm like, I am such a bad teacher, because all of those I just teach. Like, I should probably do more reading of like up-to-date pedagogy.
You say that you're an edutainer.
Edutainer. Yeah.
Edutainer. And I think that's important as well, to get kids excited about science or about the subject matter that they're learning. You have to remember that for a considerable amount of my career, I was teaching about Canadian social studies and the Canadian government.
Oh, right. So you can't really make explosions about like, hey, now let's learn about the Senate.
Yes. Today we're learning about the structure of the federal government. We have 3 branches of government, right? And you had to teach it in a way that was fun. And so I did a lot of projects with the kids to help them have choice in how they want to learn that material, because we are mandated to teach the curriculum, and we have the freedom to create those opportunities for students to learn that are more meaningful for them. Because really, are they going to remember the stages of how a bill is passed? Maybe if they made a rap song about it.
I think that's kind of like lacking with everybody in most places in the world, is they just don't understand how government works. But then the same thing could be said for science, right? A lot of people, we found out very, very starkly, just don't understand how science works.
True. But social studies, I believe, is the backbone of all curriculum. That's why we have social studies 30. Students have to take a 30 level social studies in order to graduate, because it is the backbone. And also, I learned that was and also that was affirmed when I did my curriculum studies with my master's, the importance of social science. Yeah. If students have a good teacher who is interdisciplinary, it will transfer across fields. And that critical thinking is important. And then you can tie that into science. You can tie that into math. You can tie that into language arts. It's just beautiful.
One of the things that you always have done in your teaching career is you build community with your school. Like, you do activities with the kids and you set up clubs and stuff like that. And I guess I sort of do that with Cass in the last 5 years at my school. What are some of the things that you've done with kids to, set up some kind of community thing?
Well, one of the very first things that I did was in my practicum, and you like to remind me about it all the time, when I set up cool crafts for kids.
Yeah.
Yeah. Where I was teaching grade 3, which is a very awesome and wonderful age group to teach. And I was doing my practicum because I thought I wanted to be in elementary as an elementary teacher. And I made this cool crafts for kids activity club, and it was a hit. But really, it all started when I signed up to be the teacher advisor to run an extracurricular leadership club at the school that I was at. And I was involved with student council. And during that involvement, I observed the students building capacity as leaders as they worked within the school. And I was inspired by that. I was inspired by leading students to become future leaders themselves. So what they did is they were working within the school, and then they went out into the community to serve others, to serve and minister to the well-being of others. So as the teacher advisor, I provided a vehicle for that interaction or that space to happen. So the students planned and implemented projects, and I was able to journey with them as they grew and were rewarded intellectually, emotionally, spiritually, and civically. So to illustrate the first experience where I incorporated student leadership was in a Leadership 9 course where I was at a kindergarten through grade 9 school. I worked with an outside agency that embraced diversity and denounced racism. And now, because of the work the students were doing in the school already, we were invited to a leadership summit run by the Central Alberta Diversity Association, and it was entitled Speak Up and Speak Out. So students were engaged. So we attended Speak Up, Speak Out, and there students were engaged with presentations, guest speakers, and breakout sessions. And what they did is they learned strategies to respond to and to be able to educate about preventing discrimination from happening in school. So after we attended, we were inspired, and I partnered with the coordinator of the Diversity Association so my students could apply what they learned and teach about discrimination to our younger students at the school.
That's so cool.
Yeah, so I collaborated with a service coordinator, and we worked together to plan, create, and teach diversity lessons and activities to students in grades 1 through 5 at our school. So the grade 9s were working with the grade 1s through 5. So the students created lessons where they first led a group discussion about diversity. Then they had picked a picture book and read it to the students. And they used the theme of the book to create a meaningful craft or activity that the younger students could take home. So I think that's where like the cool crafts for kids kind of came into that idea. And the activity was a success. And the cross-grade groupings not only allowed for building community within our school, where our students learned from each other, but it just gave that opportunity for my students to become on fire and excited about making change in the world.
That is an incredible project you did. And if I tried to remember my projects, I'd be kind of stumbling here and there.
Well, Jason, you are able to articulate ideas right off the top of your head, whereas I am a thinker and a planner, and I want to ensure that I sound like I know what I'm talking about. So I prep.
So you're a thinker and a planner, and I'm not, right?
You're just a doer. You think and you plan, but you're like, hey, I had this idea and I implemented it in 5 seconds. And I've tried your 5-second ideas, and because there's like some scaffolding that's missing, I can't do that, right? So for me, I'm a different type of planner than you.
No, I'm just teasing you. You did really good. So speaking of things that you're amazing at, I just want you to talk about this award you won. You won the highest award that a teacher can get in the Catholic school division. Could you talk to us about that?
Yes. So I won the Excellence in Catholic Education Award in 2015. And the award is given by the Council of Catholic School Superintendents of Alberta, so the CCSSA. I can't put my finger on exactly why I was nominated for this award, but it is an award that is won by very few people in a school year. Being a faith coach, we went to a faith coach meeting, and I was in a French-speaking school. So our leader said, hey, there's an opportunity to invite a Catholic French-speaking bishop to come to Canada from Brazil and talk about farming in Brazil and what development and peace, working with development and peace and what they are doing for farmers in Brazil. I said, what? This is perfect. I will invite Bishop Eugenio to our school to speak to our students about what development and peace is doing. And then we can piggyback off that and create opportunities to give back to a global organization helping with the global south and the inequity that is there. Sure enough, so I said, okay, I got the information, I invited him, he came, he spoke, and being in Central Alberta, sometimes it's difficult to get French-speaking presenters in at a school. So I thought, this checks all the boxes. This is perfect. And in he came, and then away he went. And then the leader of the faith coach group said, I would never have done that. He said, I actually can't believe that you did that. I said, what? Why? Well, because like you would have to kind of jump through hoops and things have to be just so when you invite a bishop or the archbishop into your school. I didn't know any of this. I just did it, right? It's like, this is a good idea. Let's muddle through. There was an English speaking liaison that I worked with. And I actually, it was during Lent. And so I got, instead of doing our typical Lent celebration, I said, okay, the team that's in charge of that, would you help me with the Bishop Eugenio presentation? Yes, 100%. And so we did that and he came, and that was one thing.
So I want to say it was a pretty big deal that this bishop guy came to your school, right?
I think it was, but I didn't think it was at the time. I just thought it was a thing that it was an excellent opportunity. But he did come from Brazil, so that is far. And
that's pretty cool.
And bishops are high up in the hierarchy of the Catholic Church. So,
well, also in chess too.
We also have to demonstrate an in-depth knowledge of subject matter and curriculum and be able to permeate Catholic values into our teaching, but also being involved in professional growth and doing activities. So partnering with organizations such as Development and Peace and such as the Diversity Association. I've worked with the Central Alberta Refugee Effort. I've worked with the Humane Society here in Red Deer. So I've worked with organizations that are local as well as global.
See, that's why I brag about you all the time. I was like, she won this award. And people are like, well, what is the award? And I'm like, I have no idea, but I know it's important. And now I know a little bit more.
Yeah.
On the podcast, we ask our guests a couple standard questions, and this is going to be kind of funny because it's you, and people have heard you on the podcast before. The first question is, share a memorable pet story from your life. I don't have no idea what you're going to talk about, but could you share a pet story from your life?
Okay, so I have shared a lot about Bunsen and Beaker. I have shared about Callan. And I have shared about your relationship with Callan and how wonderful that was. But I'm going to share a story about Poco.
Poco. Mm.
So we had a cat named Poco, and I loved Poco. Poco lived to be upwards and beyond 20 years old. She was definitely a survivor. Persian cat, long hair, beautiful cat. I loved her. And she was my cat. And when I lived on the farm, but then went to live in the city as part of, when you grow up, you move away from home. And Poco came with me to my basement suite. And we had just started hanging out and we were friends. You've been my best friend for over 25 years. And you are allergic to cats. And you came over one
super allergic.
Super allergic. And I'm like, oh, I have Poco. I have a cat. I love her. And you were like, oh, hi, Poco, trying to be nice and warm and welcoming and wanting to fit in with Poco. But you reached out to pet her and she went, rah! And she scratched you and you swelled up like a balloon. And
and bit me.
Oh, yeah, she bit you. I didn't want to highlight that part, but yeah, she did. And then you had said, oh my goodness, what is happening? You really had to reconcile hanging out with me who had like a kryptonite for you, a cat. And yet your love for me overtook your allergy to cats. But anyway, so when she died, we do we bury our animals here on the farm. And so Poco was buried and my mom said, does anybody have any words that they would like to share? And you said, Poco, thank you for only biting me once. Yep. She only did bite you that one time. And then she became accepting of you.
Indifferently tolerant, perhaps.
Okay.
And I didn't go out of my way to like try and touch this cat either, because anytime I would come close, she would go like, you can be over there, you cat. Yes, Poco the cat. I remember Poco. I'm glad you had this animal in your life. I'm not a cat person. But I'm glad you have fond memories of Poco. My memories are somewhat meh. But that's just because I don't think she liked me. But that's okay. The second standard question we ask on the podcast is a super fact. Do you have a super fact you could share with us?
I sure do. So as I said, we've been best friends for a very, very long time. And I am very fortunate. And I always tell people that I love the fact that I am married to my very best friend. But I want to share the story of how you asked me to marry you.
That's a super fact?
Jason, you had said I could share something.
I'm just teasing you. Go ahead.
You said I could share something that would blow people away, because that's part of the question.
Okay.
So I was working and you're like, do you work today? Because I was working 2 part-time jobs, maybe 3 part-time jobs, putting us through college and university. You were kind of a little bit weird about my car. And I didn't really think much about it, but I got into my car maybe to go somewhere else to meet you, but because we had a plan to get together. But there was a rose on the front seat of my car. And I was like, what? How did a rose get into my car? And then there was a note with the rose. And I read the note, and it was a scavenger hunt to go to all of the memorable places that we had gone while we were dating. And every place I would go to, I'd find a new rose, and then I would find a new note. And so it was like a trip down our relationship of the places that we'd gone and the places that we fell in love. And it just makes me think of like a sitcom that is going through the seasons of basically the sitcom, but it was the seasons of our relationship. And so I would
like a clip show.
Like which?
Like a clip show.
Yeah, like a clip show. And so I would
in a sitcom, somebody would have like somebody would have taken the rose and the note and you would have got stuck halfway through the scavenger hunt, which was I was terrified of that, but it worked.
Yeah, no, it worked. It worked. I got through all of the scavenger hunt, and then the last place, it's like come to the hill where we would sit and look under the stars, and that's where you'll find me. And so I walked up the hill, and there you were, waiting to ask me to marry you. And I said, yes.
Boy, it sounds better when you explain it.
What do you mean? It sounds amazing, no matter who explains it.
Well, hopefully that super fact is super fact enough for people that are listening. I mean, it's a Christmas. This is coming out right at Christmas time, so it might hit people in the feels. Thank you for sharing that super fact. That brings back good memories for me too.
So my super fact is something that that when you tell people, it blows them away because everybody's like, "Aww," when I tell them, and I think they're really jealous that I have you because you're amazing.
I think, didn't you tell somebody and they were like, they got super mad at their fiance because their fiance like threw a shoe at them with the ring in it. And that was how the fiance proposed. I seem to remember that story.
So sometimes I just hold this one near and dear to my heart, and feel the room before I tell it. But
right. Because the story could lead to a divorce potentially. If the guy put in zero effort, it might cause somebody to rethink what's going on in their relationship. So guys, if you're listening to this, you don't have to spend a lot of money, but you got to do a good job of this because it's a big deal. Don't throw a shoe at somebody with a ring in it. The last section of the podcast is a fun one where we get to know our guest a little bit more than what the interview is allowed for. It's the important to you section where guests talk about causes or hobbies they're passionate about. What are you going to talk about, Kris? What's your passion for a hobby or cause? What do you have?
I am passionate about taking care of mental health, and mental health awareness is very important to me. I think it's something that it needs to be further showcased and normalized. That mental health is as important to take care of as your physical health. So that's one important cause that I champion when I'm working in my schools. I also champion. I also really like the 1510 Foundation that Matt was talking about, and further exploring how we can potentially grow something here in our community here in Alberta or in Canada, just taking care of pets because they are also important to us as family members and for our mental health.
Yeah, that's great. Mental health is important. I think like from people I've talked to on the podcast, it was nobody talked about it before. Like I want to even say like 5 years ago. And now it's still stigmatized, you're right, but it's less so. More people are openly talking about mental health, and that can only be a good thing.
Right. I think we're improving. I think issues and causes are being more normalized and talked about, and that's affecting change, which I think is important.
So that's a cause. Do you have a hobby that you'd like to talk about? Do you do something like to de-stress?
So what I've done is I plan to go to the gym. We have a gym that we work out at where we access trainers. And so they're counting on me to come. And that's been a really good outlet for me since the start of the pandemic. It's been important because if you take care of your physical health, then everything kind of follows through as well. So those are my hobbies.
Yeah, you're in such good shape now. I think you can tackle Chestermere Lake in about 4 days.
Maybe it's a death hike. We'll see.
We'll see.
But that's what I find. My hobbies are taking care of my family, taking care of my dogs, taking care of the social media, and definitely being the best teacher and mentor that I can be for my staff and students.
That's a hobby in itself. You're right. That's a cause. That's a passion. Thanks for sharing that, Kris. Okay, so this is the odd thing. We're at the end of the interview. Can people follow you on social media? Do you have a social media account that came back from the grave, I think?
I started my Twitter account in 2016, and I wasn't really on Twitter. So part of my role, or what I have done with my school, is I was on their social media team. So I've been on 2 school social media teams, and so that was also consuming. So it takes away from my personal account. I do have a Twitter account. My handle is usually Kris Zackowski, and I do have Instagram, and I have Facebook. Okay.
We'll make sure that Kris Zackowski is linked in the show notes so everybody can follow you.
Okay.
All right. Thanks for being a guest today, Kris. This was great. I didn't know how it was going to go. It was good. It was a little awkward in places, maybe, but I think it was really heartfelt, and it was a good interview to end season 3 with.
Thank you for having me. I really appreciate this space to share a little bit about me, share a little bit about us, and share a little bit about the dogs and what we're doing to try and make the world a better place.
Yeah. Okay, take care.
Bye.
I'll see you in 2 seconds.
Okay.
Hey everybody, before we get to the family section, I thought I'd just tell you a little bit about this fun thing that we're doing on Twitter. Twitter has this new function called Spaces. It's an audio chat room. You log into the chat, it's as easy as clicking, and you can listen away, and on mobile, you can speak. We run 2 audio chat rooms a week. We're calling them Spaces Unleashed. On Tuesday at 7 p.m., we have an amazing guest that we interview and then open the floor to questions. Some of the guests are from the podcast and previous episodes. On Saturday, we have Spaces Unleashed, Pet Chat, and you can come and listen to the wacky adventures of Bunsen and Beaker, but we really like hearing your own stories about your own pets. If you're not on Twitter, it's a reason to sign up. Come for the Spaces Tuesday and Saturday. In the show notes, you'll find our weekly newsletter that you can sign up for, which keeps you up to date on what's happening in Spaces on Twitter.
Okay, it is time for Story Time with me, Adam. Today's episode of Story Time is a very special Story Time episode. We are going to be talking about, instead of usually how it goes, is we talk about stories that have happened within the week, but now we are talking about stories that have happened within the year. Because we have, a little break coming up for about a month, maybe a little bit. But yeah, we want to leave you off with our favorite stories of the year. You know what? I will start. So this happened over the summer. We were on Vancouver Island, and we were doing lots of surfing, lots of paddleboarding. It was really fun. But one day, I decided to take Beaker with me on the stand-up paddleboard. I thought, this is going to be so fun. Beaker's going to be so happy in the paddleboard because she doesn't care about water. She likes being with people. So Dad got in the kayak with Bunsen, and I was on the paddleboard with Beaker. So Beaker, I don't know what happened to her, but she decided she really wanted to be with Bunsen. And she started shaking the whole stand-up paddleboard. So I had the waves slapping against the paddleboard. B, I had the weird kelp that was beneath us pulling me down, and C, I had a restless dog that was just moving and crying at the front of the paddleboard, just moving me around. So I fell in, and then soon thereafter Beaker fell in. And once Beaker fell in, Bunsen decided, it's a good idea. Adam's pretty close. I'm going to jump into the water too and then swim to shore. Because he didn't want to be in the kayak anymore. So he jumped out of the kayak and started going for shore. And he pulled Dad about a quarter of the way back to shore. And he was swallowing salt water because he's a smiley guy and he didn't stop smiling. So he was going, just swimming. It was gross. But yeah, Bunsen was so mad the rest of that day because he hates getting wet. And all of him was just completely soaked. So he was very angry at himself and Dad. So he just wouldn't listen to Dad for the rest of the day. He wouldn't look at Dad for the rest of the day. So yeah, that's my story. Beaker pulling me into the water and then Bunsen trying to swim to shore. Mom, do you have a story?
I sure do. I want to talk about the story that happened about this time of year last year, where we were going for a typical walk down by the creek, and we went a little bit of a different way. And as we were walking back, Bunsen acted differently. And we're like, hey, buddy, what's going on? And he went and he stood by the creek, and then after that, he went down into the creek, and we were alerted to there was a very different situation happening because of Bunsen. And I grabbed Beaker and held her by her collar, and Jason went down to investigate, and he said, there's another dog down here. And I said, what? And I said, I have treats in my pocket. Do you want to try and give the dog some treats? And Jason said, well, no, we don't know the situation. So how about you take Beaker back home? And then we'll try and figure something out. So I took Beaker back home, and I actually, on my way home, I called Adam, and I said, Adam, we really need your help. There is a dog in the creek. We're not sure of the situation. Please get your warm stuff on and be ready for when I get home. I'm bringing Beaker back, and we can go down together with a sled. And that's what we did. I got Adam set up with a sled, and I got him set up with some rope. And then I stayed back and called animal control and to see like what are the next steps? What should I do? And animal control said, well, what you can do is you can try and put a post on social media to see if there's some traction in your area that there has already been a missing dog. And I said, yeah, sure, I'll do that. And so I did that. And then what I did is I said, no, I'm going to leave the house and I'm going to go back out there. And I went and grabbed some more rope and went down and found them as they were putting the dog, Bailey, her name is, back onto the sled, and I helped walk her back to our place, and I set up the makeshift crate. We have a soft-shelled crate and a hard top crate, but I used the soft-shelled one for her, and we set her up in the garage. And by that point, animal control called back again to see where our exact location was, and I said, actually, it looks like there is a Facebook post that this potentially might be the dog. And I had already called that family, and that family was on their way to see if it was in fact their dog. And when he arrived, sure enough, he said, yep, that's Bailey. Thank you so much for finding her. She had traveled quite a ways from her home. She'd crossed the highway, and she has epilepsy. And so he said she never leaves the yard, but she must have had an episode and got disoriented and just got lost. So we rescued her. Bunsen, because of his heroic alertness, was able to indicate that there was a danger or there was something amiss. And that's the story that I'm proud that we were a part of to save Bailey. And that's my story.
Dad, do you have a story?
There are so many amazing stories from this last year with the dogs. Yeah. I can think of just peaceful stories of taking the dogs for a walk in the summer and sitting on this hill. You see it on the drone shots. We go down and we go up this hill. And there's a hill sometimes I just sit on there, the top of this hill for like 20, 30 minutes, and the dogs just sniff and play, and it's so peaceful. And I use it to recharge my batteries. I can think of taking Beaker paddleboarding with me down the river and just how relaxing it was and how proud I was of her just being with me on the river and being a good water dog. But the story that I'll remember forever and probably is the most important to me is how Bunsen saved Beaker's life twice this year. Well, I don't know if he didn't save her life twice. Once for sure. The first time was during the spring melt. All these two situations happened very close to each other. During the spring melt, coyotes moved into a place where we normally go for a walk. And I'd seen them crossing the property. And I was like, well, they're probably moving all the way through. On the walk I was taking them, and one darted out. Beaker was a little bit further away than I would have liked. And a coyote darted out after Beaker, and Bunsen took off and put the run on the coyote and chased it away, and then came back like it was nothing to do, like no big deal. And that was like, my heart was in my throat. I caught a little tiny bit of it on video, and the coyote was obviously very upset it didn't get Beaker because it was like yipping and howling at us. So for the next 2 months, we did not go that way. That kind of area was off limits to us because I was worried about losing Beaker and Bunsen. Bunsen could get taken down by a pack of coyotes. The second story where Bunsen really helped out Beaker was, I think maybe 4 weeks later, we were going on a shorter distance, and out of the bush, like in the normal way that we go, a porcupine wallowed out, and Beaker went to go check it out. And Bunsen rushed in front of her and kind of blocked her from seeing it. And it happened so fast. I think he was smelling it, and he got too close, and he got hit in the face with a whole bunch of quills, and it was just a bad situation for Bunsen. We felt so bad for him because in the time it took for me to go to get him, I grabbed Beaker because I got Beaker first. Bunsen got quilled and he was mad. Then he tried to bite it and you can't bite a porcupine. So then he got quills all up inside his mouth. And then I vaguely remember him trying to body check it with his shoulder because his mouth was so full of quills. Oh, awful situation. He was so full of quills. So the porcupine, I don't know where the porcupine went because I let go of Beaker at this point to grab Bunsen. No, I put Beaker on a leash because I always carry an emergency leash with me. This is a while ago. And Bunsen got himself back up to the house because I couldn't carry him. He's way too big. So in a whole bunch of pain, he got himself all the way back up to the house. It's probably a kilometer walk. And I got Kris on the phone by then. I'm like, we need to get him to an emergency vet now. And we did. We got into town another 20 minutes later. Poor guy's still in pain. And we had an amazing vet who saw him right away and got all of the quills out of him in literally about an hour and a half. 70 some quills was in Bunsen. So brave Bunsen to the rescue. He's a very special dog. And man, we just love him so much. And Beaker too. I've had a lot of special moments with Beaker too this year. But I just wanted to tell everybody about Bunsen. That's my story.
I have Beaker here. And she's going to say a very special goodbye. And by say a very special goodbye, I mean she's going to say nothing because Beaker is very quiet. But yeah, thank you so much for listening to all of the podcasts that you have thus far. And thank you for sticking around to the story time section this time. I can't wait to see you guys when we get back. So, bye-bye.
That's the wrap of 2021 and season 3. To all of our listeners, thank you so much for taking the time to listen to our show. And our podcast has a really stable listenership, which I appreciate so much. Special thanks this week to Kris, who was our guest. She's adorable. And also, we want to give a special shout out to our top tier patrons on Patreon. Their continued support always improves everything we do with Bunsen and Beaker content. And to the patrons listening, thank you so much. You're such cheerleaders for our family. We'll see you for season 4 with so many amazing new guests at the start of February in 2022. Take it away, Kris. Let's hear those patron names.
Chris Kelly, Samantha Dodd, Kimberly Bond, Nate Stephenson, Debbie Anderson, Courtney Proven, Renee Hardy, Mary Rater, Shelby Leggett, Mary Coos, Katya Lynch, Marianne McNally, Andrea Persons, Elizabeth Bourgeois, Karen Beth St. George, Bianca Hyde, Sandy Breimer, Tracy Halberg, Jenny Jaguar, Leela Perriello, Lynn Armstrong, Lisa Swartz, Catherine Jordan, Donna Craig, Lila Ashir, Jody Ogren, Liz Button, Kathy Zerker, and Ben Rathert.
For science, empathy, and cuteness.